If you've been following along, you know that we have been breaking down the 27 plot point outline, also known as the 27 chapter outline, if that's how you know it. However, we are moving right along into plot point 25. The protagonist begins their final battle, also known as simply the final battle. You're going to learn in this lesson a little bit about what you should be focusing on narratively when it comes to your plot points, specifically the 25th one. So let's get into it. And understanding one thing before we get into the rift of it. As we know, this is starting off Section 9. That's right, we are in Act 3, Section 9, Plot Point 25. So, Section 9 is all about resolve, resolve, resolve. However, Plot Point 25 acts as a first plot point to the section, and therefore, think of this as setting up context, subtext, all the texts. It's all about understanding the stakes, who, what do we call it, the what, where, when, why, and how of it all. And that's what we're going to break down today. Let's keep it going and get into the groove. All right. The end is nigh. Plot point 25. That's right. We're all in it to win it, because at the end of the day, plot point 25's primary goal is to initiate the final confrontation. It's the start of the end. A small misstep in the narrative process is writing the beginning of the end as the end itself. Ultimately, what that means is that some people just, in this beat, it is the climax to them, and they're not necessarily setting up the climax. They are just jumping into the climax. There's a thing that happens, and they win or lose. Ultimately, plot point 25 is setting up the climax to come. All right. It could start a battle. It could start a final a showdown. It could start a moral dilemma. The point is, it starts the thing. It doesn't actually just. I have cat hair in my face. It doesn't just start and end. It is literally focused on setting things up. So think of this as, or remember more specifically, plot point 25 is indeed, as I said, the first plot point in Section 9. So this plot point is setting everything up. It's setting up context, the stakes, and what a win or loss might look like. All right? At the end of the day, context is king. It's always going to be king. Context must happen in every first of a narrative. First act sets up the context for the whole narrative. First section in every act sets up that act. First plot point in every section sets up context for that section. And plot point 25 is no different. Ultimately, the reader must know exactly what a win should look like and what the cost of failure will be. The narrative can't work if the reader doesn't process ultimately like a flawless, crystal clear understanding of, at minimum, the baseline conditions and final circumstances of the climax starting point. But most importantly, you're not going to end the narrative in this moment. Oh no. You're starting the final climax against the antagonistic force. Antagonistic force doesn't mean that it is a one-off villain or will they, won't they. It is whatever has been pushing back against the protagonist, and they're ultimately fighting it. And will they win or lose? Well, we'll find out on the next plot point. But why are we starting the climax? Well, to give the narrative rising weight. Yes, if we just jump into the climax and start fighting each other, and we're just do they proclaim their love to the person they care about in a romance? You want to see them going for it and not just be like, hey, will you be with me? And then it's like, yeah, sure. You need that stepping stone, that beat before the just be with me moment, or I come to fight you and free the kingdom of your tyranny, right? Whatever the case is, you need a moment leading up to that beat, all right? And the reason you do that is because it develops and creates the narrative weight. Now, weight is good for the opening of a Section 9. Weight is good for any opening of any section, because we are ultimately creating stakes, tension. We are what's at what stakes are what they could lose. That's why it's called what's at stake. What's at stake of losing. Anyway, by looking at this plot point as the beginning and setting the way, you get to lay bare emotional weight, physical weight, mental weight, and even spiritual weight of the situation. Basically, how are they going into it? What are the circumstances of their truer inside emotions? How do they physically present themselves? Are they weakened? Are they stronger? Are they no different than they were at the beginning? You want to understand where they are physically, but also mentally and spiritually. You don't have to do all of them. You could do one, two, three, or four. You can mix and match. You could start off with one and then sort of like by the end of plot point 25 lead into something else. Remember, creativity is the name of the game when it comes to writing. So you're not beholden to any specific formula, but it is good to have at least one of those elements there. Because at the end of the day, the end is nigh. And it must feel that way. Even in romance, where the will they, won't they end up together comes in, the visual idea of this sort of start of the 25th plot point, we are starting the climax. So think of it like a roller coaster, right? The roller coaster is going up the hill. Okay, it's going up the hill to the top. That's plot point 25. Plot point 25 is getting to the final hill that will drop down into the curve and ultimately come to the station. So this is the best way to look at it is plot point 25 is the ascension to the top of the hill, and plot point 26 will be the drop into that curve. P.S. I will also add that a few sub-arcs or subplots, however you want to call them, may linger at this point, but your job is to give focus to the central conflict. Why? Well, because you're always trying to narrow the narrative into specific emotional beats that focus on the plot point's purpose. And in this case, the plot point's purpose is to set up the climax and get us to the climax. Sure, sub-arcs can be presented in this moment, as well as in the climax, as well as in the resolution of plot point 27. They can be present, but they shouldn't be the direct focus of the narrative. But they can be influenced by the central conflict or influence the central conflict, and that's fine. An example is Pirates of the Caribbean. I love using this movie because it's an easy watch. I know we talk about long form narrative here, but I like to use film as an easy way to break down how narrative looks in motion, and it's quicker to look at a 3-minute scene than it is to read a 3,000-page chapter. My point is, the Pirates of the Caribbean, in the plot point 25, it's where the battle starts. So Jack Sparrow starts fighting Barbossa. The pirates are fighting the crew and the ship. Swan is running off to save the Jack Sparrow's crew that's on the Black Pearl. Okay, and William Turner is fighting like two nobodies. The point is, it's setting up stuff, but the subplots are still lingering there. Whose side is, Jack Sparrow or Jake Sparrow? Jack Sparrow on, Will Turner end up helping and stopping the curse? Will Barbossa get to eat his apple? Will the crew be saved? All these elements are playing into the final climax, but they are technically still moving the sub arcs. It's just that we're not focusing on Will Turner's growth. We're not focusing on the crew, like Jack Sparrow's crew that's locked up, in a sense, like it's their story. And the reason we know that is because whenever we focus the POV of the protagonist or the main narrative, we follow the stuff that we need to know, and we sort of don't know about the other stuff that's in the background. And what I like about Pirates of the Caribbean and this plot point is ultimately we keep our main focus on Jack Sparrow, Barbossa, and Will Turner, because those are the three three main elements of that first narrative. And then Swan is definitely important, but she's not the main part of that narrative in that sense, nor is Norrington Borrington. But at the end of the day, all those elements are working to do what? To get to the final beat. James Norrington is trying to get to the ship. Swan is trying to free the crew to get them to help Jack Sparrow and Will Turner. Jack and Will are trying to defeat Barbossa. Why? Because the pirates and the Black Pearl are the issue. They are the final climax. So all their sub-arcs are working together to come together in what we would call plot point 26 and win or not. Win or not. All right. Number 24. Two of four. A battle can take many forms. Your narrative will determine everything the climax should be, so don't worry about it. Ultimately, the story you're telling, the narrative you are presenting, will become the foundation of what you focus on. Basically, romance is not going to be like the world-ending explosion. We're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on the romance because it is specifically a romance, meaning happily ever after. They're not going to be like, if we don't stop this explosion, the world freezes or not. No, it focuses on the relationship. Epic fantasy, on the other hand, wouldn't make it about an intimate moment between two siblings finally reconciling after they lost their sister 10 years ago, and they're finally introducing the other to the family that they grew over the last 10 years, right? So epic fantasy is epic fantasy, and usually it's a massive thing that's happening. So it's not going to focus the end of the book on these two brothers or two sisters or siblings in general. And they're like, we lost our sister, and I know I should have forgiven you, and this is my family. I know, you haven't seen them, and I have a new child or whatever, right? It's going to focus on the thing that's most important in the epic fantasy, which is the epicness of it, okay? Whatever the epic thing is. All right. Now, by this point, the climax is going to ultimately and hopefully test everything the character has learned up to this point in their narrative. Whether it's how to win the man or woman in a romance, defeat the Shadow Daddy with a sword of blue bloop, or lose to Apollo Creed and Rocky. But Rocky still wins internally for going the distance. I would like to also point out, in Rocky, originally there's a scene that was going to be cut, and it's a scene where Rocky is talking to Adrian, and he ends up laying in the bed with her, and he's like, I don't think I could win. I can't win. And she's like, well, what do you want to do? And he's just like, I just want to go to the distance. So that is setting up the stakes and everything. However, plot point 25 is the start of the fight, the match. The match is starting, bing, bing, and they're getting in there, boom, boom, boom. Okay? So bear that in mind. I do want to say, okay? When I say everything that the character has learned up to this point in the narrative, what I'm saying is that it isn't necessarily a conversation or a debate. It's that in the narrative, you're trying to allow them to be in situations or circumstances where their choices are coming out organically based on their character development, unless it's a flat arc. But we're just talking about, traditionally, flat arcs are left for like crime and stuff like that. But traditionally you have an arc, whether it's a positive or negative arc, but you want to use what they have learned to influence their choices and decisions. All right. The other thing is, you're not going to be on the nose with information. You're not going to be like, well, you learned in chapter 3 these things, so these things exist. It's just, a really good example would be, what is that? Slumdog Millionaire. He ultimately experiences life getting to a point in the film, and he's playing to become a millionaire, whatever, and all the questions are connected to his experience. So that's an example, but it's an extreme example and a really good movie. But what I'm saying is, in section 9, ultimately all the elements for plot point 25 and 26 should be testing in one way or another. It doesn't have to be directly obvious. Okay. Anyway, the final battle doesn't have to be physical, by the way, so don't think it's always going to be a war. Okay? It could be a chess game. It could be kids winning their little league baseball game. It could be, will you marry me? It doesn't always have to be getting shot at. Though it could be. It could be. There's nothing wrong with that either. But whatever you choose to do, remember context and stakes. Use this plot point to re-establish the protagonist's emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual state and how those things are at stake. Meaning, where are they to start off, right? And what could they lose of their emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual states? Ultimately, this setup should refine and define the reality of the climax to come, or that it is starting, both for the reader and the characters, okay? My point is this. A final battle doesn't have to be physical combat, nor does it require flying fists, swords, or explosions. The internal weight of a scene dictates its structural importance, not the literal volume of the action. A final battle is fundamentally an arena where a protagonist's growth is tested against significant consequences and circumstances. Therefore, your climax can now be adapted to fit the exact tone and genre of your narrative, because structural development and depth matters more than brevity. You have the creative freedom to stretch this concept across more than one chapters. However, I will also say, my point is, you're not trying to focus on what is the most explosive thing, right? Oh, could we do explosions and buildings blowing up? That's great and grand and fine, but you should be focusing on what matters for your central conflict and the character's movement and growth. Whether it's a plot-driven story or a character-driven story, you still want your characters to be influenced and influence that central conflict. I will add, you do not have to look at plot point 25 as a single chapter or a single scene, though you could. You have the freedom, and the creative freedom, I should say, to expand it. For instance, if your final battle is a literal or metaphorical marathon, chapter breaks can track specific agonizing mile markers. That's right. One chapter might capture the initial burst of nervous energy at the starting line. It's pretty exciting. The next could explore the grueling psychological fatigue of the middle distance. And a third can focus on the absolute depletion of the final miles. Now, the point is, all three of those examples maintain the beginning of the end. It's not focused on the end. It is focused on the beginning before the end. All right. You technically could do 4 or 5 chapters that are just like, you know what? Chapter 25 is the very beginning. The guns go off. Great. Chapter 26 is the first quarter. Chapter 27 is the second quarter. Chapter 28 is the third quarter. Chapter 24 is the fourth quarter. And then the next chapter would be plot point 26, the end of the race. You know what I'm saying? Each chapter ultimately is a structural unit that should serve to build layered context and mounting tension. So don't feel like you have to write within a certain amount of pages or word counts. You can play with it. I have seen great storytelling where basically it's a scene and that is all plot point 25 is. Though I've seen it with a chapter and I've seen it with more than one chapter. There has to be something. It must exist, but it must function to your narrative's needs. So don't feel like I can't do anything with this. I have to do it as told. No, it's a lovely rule that has movement. But I would say focus, whatever it is you do, focus on the profound gravity of the choice the character makes and the actions of your protagonist in committing to winning, hopefully not losing, though they could still lose. And why is that important? Because the more you put into the tension, the more you put into the development of this beginning, you will earn the climax in plot point 26. This cat hair is all over me. She needed hugs before I started filming. She was like, meow, 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 meow. One more hill. Absolute clarity. The final phase of a narrative depends absolutely on clarity. You need clarity, or what's the point? Meaning, Section 9 must function as an intentional funnel that isolates your main character. So we have to think about those small mistakes that can occur in a zero first or even a second draft. It happens. We get lost. We mismanage our characters. We overwrite certain sub arcs. We forget that the central arc needs more attention. It happens. It's okay. Don't worry about that. In the third draft, you're going to start paying attention to that because again, in your zero first and second drafts, if you're trying to manage epic fantasies with like multiple plot points, or 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 you're simply having so much go on, it's not even so much sub arcs, it's gonna happen. It's just your first couple drafts are messy on purpose, and you're allowed to work it. Great writing is rewriting. I will also add though, if at this point you have subplots that are sort of lingering, that's fine. But your ultimate goal is you're trying to avoid a mass clutter leading to the climax. You don't want it to be so filled with stuff the reader can't really focus on the emotional weight of things, you know? So ultimately, to prevent this narrative jam, beep beep, plot point 25 requires a little but aggressive stage management, like you're directing and choreographing a play. Deliberately sweep away secondary distractions so the spotlight can land squarely on the protagonist's central character arc, the thing the reader has to follow. Okay, sure. In a fantasy, we might care about two characters who have flirted this whole time, but will the protagonist kill the dragon or discover the werewolf is their cousin? Right? We care about those two characters who have been flirting. The enemies to lover, maybe, right? All that. But in reality, if we don't give time to will the protagonist kill a dragon or their werewolf is the cursed cousin, it's going to kind of like flatten or weaken your end. It's gonna weaken the resolution and the climax, if anything. So what I would say is major epic structures offer slight structural leeway because you get a little bit more to play with, and we're expecting side characters and stuff to have a little bit of resolve, and they're going to wander those threads. They're going to come across as like, is this still going on? We still need to get this done. That's fine. Besides that, if it does feel cluttered, your beta readers are going to tell you, and all you're going to do is kind of do the work. That's all I'm saying. Basically use plot point 25 to wrap up any remaining minor subarcs if you can. And if secondary character sidekicks or romantic interests still have unfinished business, their battles should reach a definitive conclusion right here within these pages, or work to see what you can do in the next plot point, and definitely by plot point 27, unless this is a series, and that's a whole other conversation. For example, you could allow a friend to win their duel against the person who's been challenging them throughout the whole story. They get their little beat. Willow, Mad Mardigan fights the guy, the big guy with the skull mask, and that's not necessarily the main thing, but he gets his win. All right. The other thing is maybe a soldier is trying to secure the perimeter, and you're like, you got to get to that thing, and you got to, warn everybody, and they're afraid. They have that coward. I like to use this one because it's easy. They're cowards all the time, but then they push through their fear and they get to where they got to do, and they light the fire, and everyone's like, oh, we got to go help the whatever. It doesn't have to be that crazy. It could be romance. It could be whatever genre you're playing in, but the idea still stands. That's technically still a subplot, but it is directly and deliberately influencing and affecting the main central conflict. Okay. I will say this though. P.S. The smallest of subarcs can slip by and get taken care of in PP26 and PP27 as long as they don't become a pacing nightmare and take away from the central conflict and the climax to come. All right. So set up. 4. This is the last thing. And so it begins! PP25 starts the climax by placing the protagonist directly against the antagonistic force. It's your job as the author to vividly establish the protagonist's current status and circumstances. Their mental focus, their physical capacity, emotional, spiritual readiness, all of that stuff is extremely important right now. Ultimately, is your character exhausted, bleeding, and running on pure adrenaline? Or are they spiritually grounded and ready to take on anything, having finally accepted the moral lesson of their journey? Beyond their internal state, the immediate stakes and the definition of a win must be unmistakably clear. Why? Because the reader, they need to know what's going on, exactly what's going on, what is gained by success, and what failing consequences look like upon said failure. By firmly planting this context in place earlier in the scenes of plot point 25 and doing your setup work, you create a sense of anticipation because we know what's to come, or at least what needs to be done. This deliberate setup also gives you room to actively challenge, subvert, or disrupt the context of plot point 25. To summarize, ultimately, context, narrow the focus to the central conflict, define the final battle clearly, show what the protagonist has learned, and of course, lingering sub-arcs should connect to the central conflict. PP25 ultimately begins the moment where all their growth, failure, sacrifice, fear, desire, and preparation get tested. And we need to see the protagonist enter the final confrontation carrying everything the narrative journey has taught them. But more importantly, this is true for every genre, whether it's romance, fantasy, sci-fi, noir, crime, cozy romance, whatever. It doesn't matter. It exists because it exists. With that said, hey, I don't know if you noticed, but as always, if you want to learn more about writing, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out. And feel free to check out my other videos. That's pretty much it for now. That's it. That is it. Any questions about this lessons or writing in general or your book? Let me know in the comments below. I'm always happy to answer those. If you have questions you would like me to do videos on, if I have videos that you want me to go into deeper, let me know in the comments below and I will film those videos. With that said, remember to bloop that beard and bloop that like button. Why? Because every like, comment, and share tells the YouTube algorithm that you're enjoying this channel and want to see more. That's right. And remember, I have some books available. MakeAWriteLeftHere.com. You could check me out. I have plenty of books. We got this book, which is about narrative movement. The first half explains what a narrative is and how to use it for you pantsers out there. I love you pantsers. And the second half is all about outlining and giving real-time examples and breaking down how to use the 27 plot point outline. And ultimately, if you didn't know, I also have A Death of a King, which is an epic fantasy first book in a 5-book series. It is only available on Substack and Patreon. If you join Patreon, it's under the Scribe tier. If you join Substack, it's just joining Substack. I will say this, you get to see the 0, 1st, and 3rd draft before the polished examples of the chapters. Why? So you can compare them and read my notes on my process. And I also take that process and place it into how you could utilize this for your own books. More importantly, if you didn't know, I also have books on how to be successful in the entertainment industry, including being a writer as yourselves. This first book is the foundation for longevity, whereas this book, I'm currently reading through the author copy. This will be available in July, just next month. And this is the second book in the series. All the books are written. I'm just sort of releasing them slowly but surely over the course of a couple of years. All right, with that said, I also have a noir, which is available on Substack and Patreon. Again, if you join Patreon, it's the Scribe tier. I will say this. I do have a membership available. That's right. I have a course that I've been making that the first 3 videos are free on YouTube or Patreon or Substack. However, if you join the membership on my YouTube channel, you can watch the How to Write a Narrative. By the way, I'm adding to that course every week on Thursdays/Fridays, depending if I could get the video recorded in time, but it's always Thursday or Friday. Also, Also, you'll get some posts that are written ideas and helpful tips for all my membership people. If you don't want to join the membership, did you know you could actually join Patreon or Substack and get to watch the entirety of how to write a narrative? And also you get all those downloadables and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. Other than that, I'm done. I'm Thomas J. Bellezza, and as always, keep developing the right mindset. I'll see you later. I gotta wash my face of this cat hair. Bye.